Hi everyone and welcome back to Ezay Learning. Today we are going to try a RBT mock exam and this is from the website Behavioral Buzz. You can also simply go to the www.behavioralbuzz.com and you can write RBT mock exam and you will see this page. They have given a simple question and answer mock exam A, then scenario based mock exam B. So this practice exam is for around 90 minutes and it is based on authentic exam experience covering the essential RBT or ABAT task list. The competency standards for RBT, ABAT and for IBT all are same. So whether you are preparing for RBT, ABAT or IBT, you can simply attempt any of the quiz. You can study from RBT exam RBT mock exams, you can study from the material because the basic concepts, the main requirements are the same. So preparing through RBT material also means that you're preparing for a bad exam. So starting with the simple question and answers. Which of the following is a direct assessment method? So by the term direct means you will be doing it directly on the client, like you are not taking the data from the caregivers, from the other people. You are taking the data directly from the client. So in terms of observation, interviews and questionnaires, you basically take data directly through observations. Next is, how does a preference assessment benefit the client? So basically by conducting preference assessment you are identifying the potential reinforcers, which means that the reinforcers that may increase the likelihood of desired behavior. So basically it helps in identifying reinforcers that increase the likelihood of desired behavior. Next, which type of assessment involves observing and analyzing the antecedent and consequence of behavior? So, whenever we talk about antecedent, behavior, and consequence ABC, we are basically talking about functional behavioral assessment. We are understanding the reason, we are understanding the consequence, and we are basically so the type of assessment would be functional behavioral assessment. Functional behavior assessment. What role does the RBT play in the functional assessment process? So, what is the role of an RBT? Basically, RBT cannot create plan, he cannot design any plan, and so he cannot interpret the results on his own. He can simply implement interventions and he can collect data on observed behavior. So the most likely answer for this would be collecting data on observed behavior. Next is, which assessment is crucial for planning individualized behavior intervention, which means specific for specific person. So this has to be specific, it has to be individualized. So which of these should be most likely? Standardized academics, so no. Intelligence quotient, functional behavior assessment would be the answer because the ABC, the antecedent, the behavior, the consequence could be different for different individuals. What is a scatter plot used for in behavior assessment? So we mainly use three types of plots, three types of graphs: line graph, bar graph, and scatter plot. Scatter plot basically, answer is that scatter plot is used to identify patterns of behavior over time. Why are ABC, antecedent behavior consequence chart, used in behavior analysis? Why are we conducting ABC data? To identify potential relationship between behavior and environmental variables. Like what are the antecedents or what are the outcomes that are influencing what? The behavior. So that's why knowing the antecedent behavior consequence is important to identify relationship between behavior and environmental variables. What is the primary purpose of conducting a preference assessment? Again, to identify potential reinforcers. So to identify stimuli that can be used as reinforcers. Which assessment tool is typically used to gather information from people who know the client well, such as parents or teachers? So basically, we conduct interviews with the caregivers, with the people who know the client well, to identify or gather information. In a functional behavior assessment, what term is used to describe the events that occur immediately before a behavior? So for before, it is antecedent, for after, it is consequence. During a functional behavior assessment, what is the primary focus when analyzing consequence? So consequence is basically what happens after the behavior. So you have to identify what the individuals gain from the behavior. What is the outcome or what is the consequence of the behavior? What is the purpose of conducting a skills assessment? For skills assessment, you are identifying what skills the client already has, what is the level of those skills, and what areas need to be improved. So to identify areas of strength and areas needing improvement. What does a task analysis involve? So, whenever we talk about task analysis, behavior analysis, or any such thing, we are basically breaking down something. So, breaking down task into smaller components would be the task analysis. Again, breaking down a behavior into its smaller components. What is an indirect assessment in behavior analysis? Indirect assessment is when you are not gathering the information or data directly from the client, but you are getting it from other resources. Using interviews or questionnaires to gather information about behavior. What is the primary goal of skill acquisition programs in ABA? Skill acquisition, so the goal is to increase socially significant behaviors to get any skills, to increase socially significant behavior. What is the purpose of task analysis? Same answer, to break down a complex skill into smaller teachable units. Which strategy involves teaching in the natural environment and making use of naturally occurring opportunities? As the name indicates, natural environment, so it would be natural environment training NET, which involves teaching in the natural environment. In the context of ABA, what is chaining used for? So chaining is basically just like a chain. There are smaller rings which contribute to making a complete chain. Just like that, smaller or simpler steps contribute to a complex or larger, bigger behavior. Just so the answer would be teaching a complex behavior by breaking it down into smaller steps. Which technique is used to gradually reduce the level of assistance given to a learner? So prompting is when you are basically giving cues, signals or help to the client, and then fading is reducing the prompt level. So basically prompting was the assistance and reducing it is known as fading. So fading is the technique to reduce the level of assistance. What type of prompt is considered most intrusive? So basically most intrusive, by the term we mean that the prompt which give less space and privacy to the client, it is basically more of an intrusion to the client's space, and obviously the physical prompt would be the most intrusive. What is an example of a pivotal response in pivotal response treatment? So when we talk about pivotal response, we don't talk about smaller things. We are talking about major changes, long lasting changes. So all these are basically these are basically related to single thing, but initiating communication is a larger vision. It is more than just responding to name or following or completing something. What is the significance of teaching functional communication skill? So functional communication skills include teaching the teaching the client different ways to express their needs instead of use instead of showing challenging or maladaptive behavior. So it is to provide alternative ways to express needs, thus reducing challenging behaviors. How is generalization addressed in ABA programs? So generalization in ABA is addressed by conducting or teaching the skills in variety of settings with different people and across different stimuli. It does not depend on a single thing. Which of the following is a key component of discrete trial training? Okay, so a clear beginning and an end of each trial, because DTT, discrete trial training, involve multiple trials. So there should be a clear start and clear end of each trial, so you could identify or differentiate the trials. What principle does shaping rely on? Okay, so shaping is basically reinforcing successive approximation. So when you are reinforcing successive approximation, it is positive reinforcement. So it is shaping is based on positive reinforcement. When implementing a skill acquisition plan, what is the role of reinforcement? The role of reinforcement is to increase the likelihood of a behavior occurring. What does the term prompt refer to in skill acquisition? As we already said, it is a cue or assistance. What is a maintenance phase in skill acquisition? Maintenance is when, even with time, the skill continues to be performed. Even if you are not teaching it continuously, even if you are not giving constant reinforcement, the skill has been maintained. That would be the maintenance phase. What should an RBT do if they observe a colleague violating a client's confidentiality? They are required to report the violation to their supervisor, and so is an ABAT or IBT is supposed to do. What guideline should be followed when using electronic documentation system? Ensure that the system is secure and complies with privacy regulation. Which format is most appropriate for session notes? Objective and measurable. Obviously you have to explain in the most measurable and objective way. You don't have to include any subjectivity. What action should be taken if an error is made in documentation? Clearly indicate the correction and initial date it. Which of the following best describe professional conduct in documentation? So by the term conduct, you have to use respectful language and avoid value judgments. In the context of ABA therapy, who are considered stakeholders? So anyone involved within the care, within the treatment plan, are considered as stakeholders. These can be clients, their families, supervisors, and other professionals. Confidentiality in documentation requires. So, confidentiality means you have to share the information only with those who have a need to know. You don't have to post it everywhere. You're not supposed to discuss the client's progress in public areas. Which of the following is a key component of effective documentation? Opinion is not a key component, personal information is not the key component. Basically, the detailed description of the intervention strategy. Why is it important to document the client's response to intervention? Because based on the client's response, you can adjust interventions based on its effectiveness. When communicating with stakeholder, it is important to ensure understanding by using clear and concise language. You should not be using any technical jargons. You should not be sharing each and every information, and you should not be focusing on negative aspect. Instead, the language should be clear and concise. What is the primary purpose of documenting special data? To communicate, to fulfill insurance, to monitor progress, all of the above. What is the significance of obtained informed consent for services? It ensures that the client or guardian understands and agrees to the proposed intervention. How should an RBT handle a request for client information from an unauthorized person? Politely refuse and explain the importance of confidentiality because the person is unauthorized. You are not supposed to share information. Where can you get tons of ABA gear to wear to your new job after your RBT exam? Obviously, they are going to add a MCQ related to their own website because they are offering a free mock exam. So let's just select their URL. How should an RBT respond to unethical behavior observed in the workplace? Report on behavior following the organization's protocol. The concept of dual relationship refers to the concept of dual relationship refers to having relationship with the client or their caregivers, a personal relationship as well as a professional relationship. RBTs are required to document their work accurately. This is because continuity of care, legal record, billing and insurance, all of the above. What should an RBT do if they disagree with the supervisor's recommendation? Discuss their concerns directly with the supervisor. Why is it important for RBTs to adhere to the PACB's ethical guidelines, to maintain certification, to ensure safety, to avoid legal consequences, all of the above? Which action demonstrates an RBT's commitment to professional development? So basically, you have to it's about career development. uh, for Among the following actions, attending workshops and continuing education courses in behavior analysis would be the most relatable action. What is the primary role of supervision for an RBT? To provide ongoing training and oversight. Which of the following activities is outside the scope of practice for an RBT? As we said earlier, an RBT cannot design or create interventions or assessment plans on his own. Confidentiality is a fundamental ethical obligation. When might breaking confidentiality be justified? When can you break confidentiality? When can you share the information with someone? When it is justified. Basically, when it is necessary to protect the client or others from harm, like when it is self-injurious or when it is harmful for others, then breaking the confidentiality is justified, but only to the relatable, but only to the relevant people. An RBT receives a gift from a client's family. What is the appropriate action? Informed consent is essential before starting any intervention. What does this entail? So, informed consent when you are explaining the intervention in detail to the client or guardian. What is the best what is the best practice when an RBT encounters a situation outside their competence? Which principle is violated if an RBT starts a private relationship with a client's family member? Professional boundaries because it will be dual relationship. An RBT must always work under the supervision of a BCBA, Board Certified Behavior Analyst. What is the primary goal of a crisis intervention plan? To provide detailed steps for responding to safety concerns. What is a behavior intervention plan? When is it appropriate to use punishment in a behavior reduction plan? After less After less intrusive methods have been tried and documented and they did not work, then it is appropriate to use punishment. Which differential reinforcement strategy involves providing reinforcement for exhibiting a behavior that is physically incompatible with the problem behavior? So the DR stands for differential reinforcement, A stands for alternative behavior, L stands for low rates, I stands for incompatible behavior, and O stands for other behavior. So here we are talking about incompatible, it would be DRI. Which of the following is a critical ethical consideration when implementing behavior reduction strategies? We have to prioritize the dignity and autonomy of the individual. What role does a functional behavior assessment play in behavior reduction? It determines the antecedent, behavior, and consequence. Why is it important to include strategies for promoting generalization and maintenance in a behavior reduction plan? Basically, to ensure that the behavior changes persist over time and across different environments, it does not just simply go in. Which strategy involves reinforcing any behavior other than the target behavior? So basically, we are saying other, it would be differential reinforcement of other behavior. In the context of behavior reduction, what does generalization refer to? Generalization is the ability to maintain the target behavior, to maintain the reduced behavior, to maintain the reduced level of the target behavior in various settings. How should data on behavior reduction be reported? Regularly using objective and measurable data. What is the first step in developing a behavior reduction plan? Conducting a functional behavior assessment, you need to identify the triggers or the antecedents and the outcomes or consequence of a behavior first. Then you can develop a behavior reduction plan. What is the significance of baseline data in behavior reduction? Baseline data is basically to assess where the It basically provides the comparison point to assess the effectiveness of intervention. Which of the following is not a principle of behavior reduction? So you have to reduce behavior, extinction, punishment, reinforcement, all these are also used, but satiation is not a main principle of behavior reduction. What does extinction involve in the context of behavior reduction? So the extinction is when the behavior is reduced or eliminated. So extinction is basically when you remove the reinforcement for an already reinforced behavior and then the behavior goes into extinction. What is the purpose of inter-response time recording? You have to basically measure the time between end of one behavior, end of one response, and the start of the next response. It is basically the time between two responses. What is a permanent product? Permanent product is the outcome or result of a behavior that can be measured. Why is it important to have operational definitions of target behavior? When there is an operational definition of target, so when there is operational definition of target behavior, the behavior is recorded consistently, whether there are multiple observers. Which measurement procedure is best used for behaviors that have a clear beginning and an end? Basically, for frequency, there should be a clear beginning and end because it is the number of counts. You have to count the total fact or figure, and for that, you need to know when the behavior is ending and when it is starting. If it is continuous, you cannot count the number of data or behavior occurring. In partial interval recordings, a behavior is recorded if, since it is partial, it is basically the behavior that occurs at any time during the interval. It just have to occur partially. Latency recording measures the time. Latency is when you have given any instruction or command and the time starts, and when the command is being followed, that time would be the latency. So it takes for a behavior to occur after. So basically it is the time between the onset of a stimulus and start of a behavior. What does a rate of behavior refers to? Rate is basically the number of occurrences per unit of time. So the number of occurrences and time both are the main component of rate of a behavior. Duration recording is most suitable for measuring how long a behavior lasts. How does whole interval recording differ from partial interval recording? Because for partial interval recording, behavior can occur anytime, but for whole interval recording, the behavior has to be occur throughout the entire interval. When implementing continuous measurement, the observer records every instance of the target behavior during the observation period. What is the primary advantage of using interval recording over continuous recording? It is less time consuming and easier to manage. Which measurement technique would be most appropriate for assessing the duration of tantrum behavior? Duration recording. What is frequency recording? The number of counts or the number of responses. Intensity of number of times, recording the number of times a behavior occurs. Which of the following best defines momentary time sampling? So for momentary time sampling, the behavior has to be occur at the very end of the interval.